Spider-Man 2 has topped the Famitsu charts. A Western developed game is the best-selling game in Japan right now. The PS5 exclusive has topped the sales charts. Clearly, this means that Nintendo is on the run and the Switch can't compete anymore, right? Well, no. Everybody saw through this immediately. I saw through this. A little bit of investigation reveals that Spider-Man is being sold for something like 500 yen on like digital distribution cards. They're selling it for $3.50 to try to get those numbers up, to try to keep the game relevant, to try to keep the game talked about, to try to get the game out there, to try to force Miles Morales onto like innocent, unknowing Japanese people, right? Like they're desperately trying to keep them relevant. And if you've been following along with Sony, this is nothing new, right? They pulled similar stunts with Horizon Zero Dawn, right? Where they tried to say it was like going out there competing with Breath of the Wild when in reality it was these kind of discounts. They were giving the game away for free. They were including DLC sales in the total figure. And in the end, Horizon Zero Dawn's 20 million sales figures isn't realistic, right? It did not sell that many copies. And that's really exceedingly obvious if you just look at how the sequel was received, right? It came out and had a fraction of the appeal. Meanwhile, when you compare it to Tears of the Kingdom, it seems like it's gotten more popular than Breath of the Wild, right? Simply because Breath of the Wild was so great. So what this means is, and this is something I've been talking about like off and on for the longest time, especially about PlayStation games, is that we cannot rely on sales numbers to be accurate because they do not showcase the whole story, right? PlayStation is giving these insane discounts and losing out on a bunch of money to try to get those sales numbers up to compete with Nintendo, and they're failing at it, right? They're selling this game for $5, and it's still not going to be like that big of a deal, like long term, right? They're not going to sell PlayStation consoles because of Spider-Man 2, right? If anything, it's going to result in the Ubisoft problem where people just legit wait a couple of weeks to get the game for like a fraction of the price. That's what I did for Mario Rabbids Sparks of Hope, right? I had no interest in getting the game initially because I wasn't impressed with it, but I saw it was on sale a couple of weeks after launch and I went ahead and picked it up. And of course I was disappointed with it, and I hope that Nintendo doesn't continue to license out their IP to Ubisoft of all companies, but I still bought the game at a discounted price. And I think that's probably a major reason why Sparks of Hope has such an inflated sales numbers figure, even though it initially launched to rather disappointing figures. I think that the AAA gaming industry is collapsing, right? I think that they desperately need to keep people invested by trying to fake enthusiasm, fake popularity, fake critical acclaim in order to get like anybody talking about them at all. Because it's kind of shocking how little people remember the past 10 years of video games. Like, I saw Review Tech USA out of nowhere just mention The Order 1886. And it kind of dawned on me that I haven't seen anybody talk about that game in a legit, like, since it came out, right? And a lot of people don't know what that game is or why it was so controversial. But, like seeing Review Tech USA mention it, like, oh, I liked The Order 1886. Well, first of all, that demonstrates why Review Tech USA is such a detestable YouTube personality, that because he has such terrible taste in games. But second of all, like the fact that nobody other than Rich is talking about The Order 1886 or like Killzone Shadowfall or like any of this stuff, like it has no lasting impact. It was mentioned on Twitter a while back that like, oh, Croc, The Legend of the Gobos sold 3 million units. It was just as popular as Banjo-Kazooie. Well, no. Banjo-Kazooie was way more popular because it was the better game, the one that people kept coming back to for the past 25 years, right? I've done several playthroughs, right? I love Banjo-Kazooie. I have no interest in Croc because I am convinced it's just a shovelware product from a company that really could have done a lot better if they had worked with Nintendo, right? Croc is not as popular as Banjo-Kazooie because people don't think it's as good as a game. And the cope has always been that like, oh, Nintendo fans, they have nothing else to play. That's why they hyperfixate on certain titles. Well, no, like I am drowning in classic games that I've never played before, all that much of. I'm playing like, the Oracle games right now. I bought Tropical Freeze on Switch. I want to go back to the 104 to 101. Want to play Twilight Princess. I'm playing the new Dragon Quest monsters now. Another Code R just came out. Mario versus Donkey Kong next week. Splatoon 3 side order next month. The week after that. Splatoon side order the week after Mario versus DK. Unicorn Overlord in early March. Princess Peach Showtime, in late March, a Nintendo Direct could drop at any time. You really think I'm starving for content? Really? When I can't even, find the time to get through Dragon Quest Monsters? Are you serious, bro? You really think this? And, I do think this is the major thing I'm concerned about going forward is just addressing the sales question, addressing the player count question, because I am very, very tired in seeing people use sales numbers and alleged player counts to justify being excited for these games. We're seeing this now with Palworld, and we saw this with Baldur's Gate 3 and Elden Ring, where people were just spouting about oh, look at how much the game has sold. Look at how popular the game is. Look how bigger it is than this Nintendo property. Completely refusing to acknowledge that the genres are different, the situations are different. Nintendo games have more competition, right, on their platforms, right? Completely refusing to accept the fact that Nintendo games are successful, right? How many of these people acknowledge that Tears of the Kingdom did well, right? Throughout all of 2019, 2023, all we saw were complaints from people saying it wasn't going to do well, that it wasn't going to be as good as the original, but as Breath of the Wild, but it ended up kind of surpassing it in a lot of ways. Not that I or anybody else will talk about it, because I think Breath of the Wild did very well for what it was, and I think Tears of the Kingdom did very well for what it was, right? In a lot of ways, I kind of understated how good Tears of the Kingdom actually was to talk about other games, right? I wanted to talk about Fire Emblem Engage. I wanted to talk about Super Mario Bros. Wonder. I wanted to talk about Cereza and the Lost Demon. I wanted to talk about everything that came out that year, because there was a lot of good stuff that everybody was writing off. And a big excuse that a lot of people had was that well, it's not as popular as some other games. Nobody cares. Okay? That is the big thing I want you to take away from this, is that nobody cares how much a game has sold, right? It is just an excuse to hype up certain games while downplaying other ones. Nobody cared when Pokemon was outselling the rest of the industry, but somehow it's a big deal when Palworld might outsell one of the Pokemon games. No, nobody cares, right? Nobody really wants to hear about sales numbers or player counts, right? That is the official stance of this channel going forward, is that I don't want to hear about sales numbers. I don't want to hear about player counts. I want to hear about actual video games. My stance is that the people who talk about sales, the people who talk about player counts, don't actually play video games.